Now, one style of cake that I love, whether it's for a birthday cake, maybe a baby shower, or even a wedding cake, is the ruffle cake. Now, one thing that I love is by changing the shape of the cutters that you use, you can create a really different effect on the cake. So for this week's video, I'm going to be using different size cutters to create different effects on your cake. Also, don't forget that if you enjoy this video tutorial, you can subscribe to the Cake Spanner's YouTube channel. You can also hit that notification bell next to the subscribe button, and this will just alert you every time I upload a new video. Okay, let's get started. So the things I'm going to use in order to make my ruffles is, first of all, I've just got my cake. Now this is just a 6-inch cake that I've covered in some pink fondant. Now I have separated my cake into 3, so I've added these lines in just so I can do the 3 different examples of my ruffles. I've then got the cutters that I'm going to be using for the different examples. Some pink fondant that matches the one that I've used on the cake. Now for my fondant, I'm using the Renshaw Extra, and this is just slightly firmer than a normal fondant. I've then got my rolling pin, and you just want either a small ball tool or a Dresden tool. And lastly, I've got some icing sugar that I've mixed with water. Now all this is going to do is just create a sticky glue to help me stick my ruffles onto my cake. Okay, for my first example of ruffles, I'm going to be using this circle cutter. Now the one I've chosen just measures 4 centimeters in diameter, but you could make them smaller or larger if you prefer. Now this cutter is just by FMM, and I'm going to use some of my fondant and roll this out so that I can cut out some of my circles. Now if you're finding that the fondant you're using is quite soft, then you can always add a small amount of gum paste to it, or maybe a small amount of Tylose powder, just so it's slightly firmer to work with, so that those ruffles are going to keep their shape. Now I'm going to roll my fondant out as thin as I can. So this one is around 1 millimeter in thickness. I'm then going to cut some of those circles out. Now a ruffle cake does take quite a lot of a circle, so this is just going to be the first lot that I create. Now I'm going to keep a few of these out and just pop the rest in a plastic container so that that fondant doesn't dry out. Now to create the shape of my ruffle, I want them all slightly different, but I'm going to start bending that ruffle but stopping before I completely push it in half. I'm then taking the sides of the circle, bringing those round in different directions, creating a kind of S shape. Just want to pinch that back so that you get a point that's going to attach onto the cake. Now I want to have a slight variation in some of my ruffles, so I'm going to bend some of those in half and just bend those in half again instead of creating that S shape. So you're just trying to create some movement for those ruffles. Now for my first ruffle, I'm just going to place this between the marks I've created on my cake, and starting with some of that water that's mixed with some icing sugar, I'm going to add that to the bottom, and we're going to work our way up the cake. Now taking my first ruffle, you want to place this against the cake, and using your small ball tool or your Dresden tool, I'm just going to use this to push that against the side of the cake, and I can then go in with the next ruffle directly next to that, and just continue to push those into place. I can then take some more of those discs that we created and just bend these round, creating that ruffle shape, and you can just use your ball tool just to push any of those ruffles to close up any gaps. And that gives us our first row. Now, if you were doing the whole cake, you would just continue along the bottom, but I've just stopped where my line is. Now, the next part we're going to do is the next row up. Now, taking some more of those ruffles, I'm going to use that point on the edge just to push in that gap. Now these ruffles are coming away from the cake around 1.5 centimeters. So if you didn't want them as big, you could just use a slightly smaller circle cutter. Now we're really starting to get that ruffle effect at the bottom. So I'm going to cut out some more circles and just work my way all the way up until we get to the top. Now, if you wanted to do an ombre effect going up the cake, then you just want to lighten your fondant. So maybe you might have the first 2 inches in one color, and then you just might want to add some white to your fondant to lighten it slightly for the next 2 inches, just going up the cake. Along the top, I'm just going to place some of that glue and just stick a nice neat row along that top edge. So once your cake, or in this case the panel on the front, has been covered, here we have the ruffles that we've created using the circle cutter. Now for this panel, so a third of the cake, I used 134 circles of fondant to create this effect, and with the circle cutter we just get this nice pretty classic ruffle. Okay, so for my second lot of ruffles, I'm going to use a square cutter. Now, this is just a cutter that measures 4 centimeters across and is also by FMM. Now, for my square ones, I'm going to do these in exactly the same way as I did my circle ruffles. So I'm rolling my fondant out until it's around 1 millimeter in thickness, and I'm going to cut out some of my squares. So just taking my square of fondant, I'm going to start to bend this so that the corners are slightly separated. And again, just bring those 2 edges in different directions and pinch on the back. So we get this ruffle effect. Now, whereas the circle was quite smooth on the outside, all I'm trying to do is create my ruffle so that we've got these points sticking out. And I'm going to do exactly the same. So bring my cake back in, apply some of that glue just to the bottom of my cake and start working my way up. Using my ball tool, or again your Dresden tool, just to push those against the side of the cake. Now I really think that using the square cutter makes it look a bit like tissue paper. Now again, you just want to finish off that top edge, just making sure that you can't see any of the bits that have been pushed against the fondant. So just use your ball tool just to bring some of those ruffles up. So here we have the finished ruffles that were made with the square cutter. So as you can see, instead of the circle one where we've got the smooth edges, we've got all these points that are sticking out. Now for this third of the cake, I used 128 squares. So for my third ruffle, I'm going to be using this 5 petal cutter, and this one is just by PME. Now I need these to be slightly firmer, so I've got a large ball of my fondant, and I've also got a ball of gum paste. Now this one is about 50% of the size of the larger ball, and I'm going to mix these together. This is going to make the ruffles dry slightly harder, but we need these ones to be able to keep their shape a little bit more. If you haven't got any gum paste, you could just add some Tylose powder to your fondant. So once those have been combined together, I'm going to roll out my fondant and gum paste mix. Now I'm going to leave these for a few minutes just so they firm up slightly before I shape them. For my petals, I'm just going to pick them up and just in the center pull all of those together into a point. I want them to go in different directions, and instead of just leaving them on the side to dry so that all the pieces can fall down, place it on my work surface with the petals facing down to dry for a few minutes so that they'll keep their shape, but not so long that they've all completely dried. So I've left all the shapes that I've cut out so far for around 5 minutes just to sit so they're holding their shape, and then taking each of the shapes, I'm just pushing that edge against the side. So with these ones, as I push them against the cake, I'm just pushing that ball tool into the center, just securing those single petals in place and making sure that they're all stuck down. And this also allows you just to pull any of those petals just into gaps. So here we have the finished ruffle technique using the 5 petal cutter. Now it just looks like you've got these individual circles all attached to the cake, and I used 126 cutters. Okay, so here we have the 3 different ruffle techniques. For the circle and the square, they took me around an hour to do each of the panels. For the 5 petal cutter, this took a little bit longer because I had to leave them to dry to keep their shape slightly. So this took me around an hour and 45 minutes to do this one panel. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and will find some of these techniques useful in your own cake decorating. If you have enjoyed the video, as always, don't forget to give it a like just so I know. And why not leave a comment below and let me know which style cutter you prefer, whether it was the circle, the square, or the petal cutter. Or maybe you have another shape that you tend to use for your ruffles. So until next time, bye!